B-frames, the mischievous troublemakers of the encoding world, seem to cause quite a bit of decoding latency. If they were actual characters in a video game, what kind of special powers or abilities would they possess? Would they be the masters of time manipulation or the sneaky tricksters of the video encoding universe? Let's see what Jan thinks. Jan, can you explain the relationship between B-frames and decoding latency in the live streaming workflow? How do B-frames impact the decoding process?
Well, from my perspective, if B-frames were a super character or a superhero, they would be the Joker because I think they come with great acclaim, and a lot of people think they deliver marvelous benefits from a quality perspective, but as we'll see, they really don't. And in the case of live streaming, they really introduce latency, and in the case of VOD streaming, they really increase the encoding time, which obviously increases encoding cost. Specifically to your question, how do B-frames affect latency in a live stream? You know, B-frames look for redundancies in frames both before and after the frame that's being encoded. So say a B-frame, or say a frame being encoded found a redundancy in a frame 5 frames after that particular frame. In order to decode that frame, you'd need that frame from 5 frames behind it, which takes 5 frames to deliver in a live stream. In a VOD stream with B-frames, you can pack the video in different orders so you can minimize that effect. But in a live stream, you don't get frame 10 until frame 10 is encoded and sent by the encoder. So B-frames impact latency because of the difference between the frame being encoded and the frame it's relying upon for redundancies. So it can be pretty extensive.
Could you elaborate on the role of B-frames in the transcoding server during the encoding process for delivery to viewers? How do B-frames introduce latency in this context?
Okay, so it's what I just said, right? I mean, if you have a 5 frame latency in the incoming stream, then that's going to translate to a 5 frame latency in the outgoing stream because obviously you can never catch up in the context of a live stream. So any latency coming in is going to affect latency coming out, and that's what we saw in our tests.
In the testing results provided, the latency decreased significantly after eliminating B-frames, both in the incoming and outgoing streams. Can you discuss the implications of these latency improvements for latency-sensitive applications?
It's important to remember that there are many factors that are going to introduce latency, and the B-frame latency is one that's on top of all the others. So even if we're only talking 150 milliseconds for the 5 frames that I've been talking about, it's 150 milliseconds on top of any other latencies that are out there. Now, if you're talking about live sports, a football match or a soccer match, it's not a big deal. On the other hand, if you're looking at live auctioning or some type of gambling, then pushing the latency over half a second or a second starts to be a big deal. And if you're looking at conferencing, I checked some statistics, and Zoom claims to be 135 milliseconds of latency. Google Meet claims to be 50 milliseconds, and Microsoft Teams claims to be 60 milliseconds. So if you send a stream with B-frames into these conferencing applications, you're going to increase the latency. Again, the 5 second or the 5 frame example I've been using, you're going to increase that by 150 milliseconds, which is obviously a pretty big deal.
Your article highlighted that eliminating B-frames has minimal impact on quality. Is there a noticeable decrease in quality?
So this kind of gets back to what I mentioned a few minutes ago about B-frames being the Joker in the superhero context, because a lot of flash, but in my experience, they deliver very little additional quality. I ran some tests, I think in 2016, that showed very, very minor differences, and I updated those for a presentation I gave at NAB this year. And this is the results that I'm showing. So this is the type of testing I do when I'm testing an encoding parameter to determine its impact on quality and its impact on encoding time. So this is 0 B-frames, this is 2 B-frames, this is 4 B-frames, and this is baseline, which in this case I think was 4 B-frames. And then here's the chart of results. And what I'm showing in this particular chart, because it's VOD, is that if you implement 0 B-frames, you cut encoding time by about 16%. So you're cutting your encoding costs. The big question obviously is, what's the impact on quality? And I measure both VMAF average quality, low frame quality here, and then standard deviation. And we see that, in fact, 4B frames does deliver the highest quality, but the overall difference between the lowest B frames, B frame 0, and the highest B frames, B frame 4, is only 0.66% of a VMAF point. So, that's not any difference that anybody would notice. And we also see very little difference in low frame quality, which is the lowest quality frame in the two video files that we're comparing, and we see very little difference in standard deviation. So yeah, 4B frames delivers the highest possible quality, but the difference between 0B frames is so small that no one would notice it. And in this case, it's going to increase your encoding costs by about 16%. In the case that we're looking at, it's going to increase your latency by the difference between where those frames are located in the video stream.
How did the testing team address the decoding latency issue in the new server product, and what were the results of their fix?
Yeah, so what they did was in the origination stream, the stream coming into the transcoder, they just eliminated B frames. They chose a GOP order that didn't have B frames in it and had all the frames in order, which eliminated the latency issue. And what we see here, we see the after. So the latency before, and I apologize, as I mentioned in the article, I didn't write down what the latency was before they changed it, and that was overwritten when they introduced the new results. But what you're seeing here is that the encoding latency is around 4.4 milliseconds, and the decode latency is 17.7, and the decode latency was in the 200 to 250 milliseconds here. So here we see this particular server transcoding 320 720p 30 streams, transcoding from 1080p 30 with latency that's well below a single frame. And we see that all the way through here. And in all these cases, the latency was around 200 to 250 milliseconds with B frames in the origination stream.
I can't help but imagine a video encoding Avengers team coming together to fight the evil forces of latency. Which encoding tools or codecs do you think would make the cut to the heroic squad? I'm thinking FFmpeg could be the Iron Man of the group, but who else deserves a spot?
From a transcoding application, I think any transcoding application is going to benefit from this. So whether it's GStreamer, whether it's FFmpeg, whether it's Wowza streaming engine, whatever it is, it's going to decrease the latency in that particular application. And in terms of codec, if we tested this on the Quadra server. So Quadra is H.264, HEVC, and AV1, and you will get reduced latency with all those codecs. So they'll all be superheroes for you if you send them streams without B frames.
Last question. What does parking lot rules have to do with latency in live streaming?
The parking lot rules were just a fond memory of taking my girls to to Walmart where we lived in this small town in Galax. And every time we got out of the car, I called parking lot rules, which means they couldn't walk in the parking lot without one of them holding my hand. And that was our way of making sure they didn't go, get run over. Um, it's kind of a twisted corollary, but from my perspective, whenever you introduce a live stream into a live streaming type application, just make sure there's no B frames. So perhaps not the logical or most logical connection, but it made sense to me.